Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on, disruptions, evolutions, opportunities, challenges, and interventions in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge. Sophie investigates the promise and reality of the future of work now and as we look ahead. She interviews people who are changing work experiences and practices and shares how we can each transition smoothly and successfully to effective and more productive new ways of working.
Hi, this episode is about corporate culture and how your company can bolster its vital components of connections, camaraderie, and community across employees working at the office, in the field, at home, and anywhere else. Shared understanding through coordinated messaging about the purpose, mission, and values of your organization create the threads that weave and reinforce the cultural fabric. Sometimes we may need to unlearn decades-old previous practices that were relevant for co-located activities and rethink approaches to critical tasks such as onboarding to ensure relationships are initiated early and nurtured purposefully. If you intentionally redesign and update your business, workflows, communications, and collaboration methods, you can foster and support a strong culture for modern work environments so that everyone can excel. I'm delighted to be speaking with Joanna Parsons, an internal communication expert, creator, educator, and mentor. Joanna is the finalist for Leader of the Year in Gartner Awards 2023 and a winner of 4 communication awards. Joanna is considered one of the leading experts in internal communication across the UK and Ireland. She is also a remote work enthusiast with a particular interest in how organizations communicate with hybrid and remote employees. Hi, Joanna. How are you?
I am great. Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, I'm delighted to be talking with you about many different aspects of the internal corporate experience, the employee experience, that's so important these days, especially as so much is changing. First, I want to start at the beginning, because from the very beginning, you were interested in internal communications. You studied something related to that at university as well, right?
I did. I've had, to coin a phrase, a bit of a squiggly career. I heard somebody use that. I liked that. I didn't study communication in university. I actually studied sociology. And I was always so curious and so fascinated by people and culture, social norms, human behaviour. So I was the happiest nerd for like 4 years in Trinity College here in Dublin. I did sociology there. And little did I know at the time that I was actually setting myself up for a really stellar career in internal communication, because all of that training in research methods and understanding people really lent itself nicely. And I did a master's after that then in international development. Always wanted to work in the charity sector, in an NGO. That's what I wanted to do since, I don't know, I think I started writing letters for Amnesty International when I was 12.
Really?
And I was just like, yeah, that was really had a big like social justice vibe. So I spent about 6 years in the charity sector, and it was during that time I fell into an internal comms role and started doing some real training on it, and I've really never looked back since.
I'm curious about, what did you write to Amnesty International at 12?
I have a feeling, I'm trying to think, I think it was something to do with Burma and like political prisoners, and you could write and sign a petition. I mean, I probably didn't really understand all of it at the time, but I really wanted to be a part of, doing some good in the world.
And so what was it about the NGO that you joined after university that particularly resonated with you?
Well, I really was very purpose-driven, I'd say. I always wanted to do something that was a bit bigger than myself. And, if I was going to have to do a job for money, I wanted it to kind of mean something. So I worked for 2 different charities after I left university. And with one of them, I went and spent a year in India, doing some communications work over there, like storytelling. They had partner local organizations over there. So I would teach them how to tell stories and how to create brochures and how to take simple photographs. And Really loved it, but I eventually left the charity sector simply because I am outrageously ambitious and it's a very small industry here in Ireland especially. And I am a bit of a home bird. I didn't want to move abroad full time. So I wanted to stay in Dublin but keep progressing my career.
When we're talking about internal communications and you're working in India, you're dealing with a very different culture, working within somebody else's culture. What did you learn during that time about communicating across cultures, teaching them about messaging to convey the things that they need to connect with external constituents?
Well, it's comms 101, isn't it? It's know your audience. So I think that stint in India really taught me, like, you really need to understand the people you're working with. You need to meet them where they are, and you need to understand the people that they're trying to communicate with as well. So, for example, we were doing some work internally to communicate about the programs in India. To say, you know, you should keep funding these are really successful, these are really good. So I would work very closely with people to try and get underneath. They were very focused on the activities. We're planting seeds, we're doing this, we're doing that. And I was like, yeah, but you know what? There's a question here we're missing, which is, so what? Like, we really need to get underneath the impact of this and some human storytelling. And is there a child whose whole life has been changed because of this piece of work? So it was really all about understanding the people before you start trying to create a message.
So then you move out of the nonprofit sector. And what was the first for-profit job that you took, and why? What really connected you with that particular organization and their work?
So I moved then into a company in financial services. And I remember being quite nervous, not about the job, but about the corporate culture, because in the NGO world, it's quite relaxed. It's almost a bit like tech. It's all jeans and hoodies, and it's a very flat hierarchy, and you can kind of make friends with all levels. So I was really nervous going into financial services, thinking, God, everyone's going to be in suits and they'll be very formal, and I won't make any friends, and I won't be able to be myself, was my big worry. And I shouldn't have been worried at all. It was an absolutely fabulous job. Absolutely loved it. And it was such a funny place to work, because I remember on my first day, someone said, have you seen the swimming pool? And I said, sorry, what? They had a swimming pool in the office and they never told candidates about it. I was like, the best kept secret in Dublin.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that really is an incredible benefit to have at the office.
But what I learned then, and I still think is true now, is that even though you can switch industries, so I was in the charity sector, then financial services, then policing, and now I'm in tech, all the communication challenges are actually more similar than different. And every time I move industry, I'm always a little bit shocked at, they have the same challenges here around jargon or leadership communications or whatever it is, but there's more similarities than differences, I think.
So there was a particular situation in how you helped an onboarding program at that company. Is that correct?
There is. I really loved that company, but something they didn't do very well when I joined was their onboarding program. And I remember, I think it was my first week there, I had to join this corporate induction, which is a terrible word. I mean, you think of like painful birth when you think of the word induction.
Right.
But there was probably 20, 25 people, and we were all sitting in a room with, I remember very vividly, there was different people coming in and out and giving kind of PowerPoint presentations for a full day. And lots of the slide decks were out of date. Clearly the presenters had not done any preparation, because there was people saying things like, oh, ignore that. Oh, I'll just skip that. And I remember the feeling of, well, this clearly is not important to them. So why is it important to me?
Right.
And what also really struck me that day was that the core values were mentioned right at the end. Like, I think we were already had our coats on, we're walking out the door. And then someone kind of pointed and said, oh, by the way, our core values are on the wall. And it was such an afterthought.
Right.
So I pitched it to my boss. Then I joined to do employee communications and staff engagement. So I said, look, we have an opportunity here to do this much better. Because when people join, like they should be so thrilled and energized, and like this is the honeymoon period, right?
Right,
So
right.
like, let's like capitalize on that. So
Yeah.
I got a bunch of people together that had recently joined, and we talked about the induction we had been through and maybe what we didn't like, what we would change, and talked about, if we could invent a new induction program, throw everything out the window that already exists, what would that look like? What would it do? And guess what? Nobody wanted any PowerPoint presentations. Nobody wanted any graphs, and people really didn't want to do those kind of stilted coffees with the leadership team, which are always so uncomfortable. So my boss at the time, fair play, she was great. She said, you just come up with something and run it by me. So I designed a half day. That was a big bit of the feedback. Why does this have to be a full day? I designed this half day, really interactive, gamified induction program based around the 4 core values. So each session was based around one of the values, and just tried to make it a bit more fun. Now, it sounds a bit cringe, right? But bear with me, because I brought in some speed dating into that day.
Ooh, okay. I like that.
So what they used to do was there was like, I think 8 different departments, and they used to get each of them to come in and do a PowerPoint presentation. So imagine 8 back-to-back presentations that were probably all really boring. So what I did instead was I got 8 desks and I put them in a circle, and they were manned by people that worked in that department. Okay. And then the new joiners would sit at that table. After 5 minutes, I'd ring a bell, they'd get up and move to the next table. So they could just go around and have a conversation and learn. And I even, I really designed things. I even had a little bowl in the middle of the table with like prompt questions. So if there was any awkward silences, you could say, what's your favorite memory of working here? Or what should a new person know? And then I also really wanted people to get to know the leadership team, but without that awkward kind of let's stand around and say hello. Yes. And I remember actually this idea came to me in bed at night, because I remember waking my husband up and he was like, oh God, what? But the leadership team at the time were called the top team. That's what they called. Okay. And I sat up in bed and I went, I've got it. And my husband was like, what? I said, top team, top trumps. And he was like, oh my God, I can't believe you woke me up for this. So for anyone who isn't as old as me, Top Trumps is a card game that we used to play as kids. Where each card has like a character, and then that character has certain strengths and weaknesses, and you can play them off each other. Okay. So I pitched it to the leadership team. I was like, we're going to make you into Top Trumps character cards. They were like, oh God. And I said, look, let me try it. Like, if it bombs, let's not do it again. Let me try it. Won't do any harm. Yeah. And so I got a designer and we made up these huge big cards with the leadership, each person's name, their giant photograph, their job title, and then some kind of stats and facts about them, and basically made it into a game where people would have to join in teams and try to match up the stats with the person. It was really funny and it was really silly. But what was great about it is by the end of that session, everybody in that room knew the face and the name of all the leaders, and they knew enough about them to spark up a conversation in the coffee area, or not to feel so awkward when they did meet them. So that's the kind of stuff I love, Sophie, kind of like a good, strong objective, but doing it a bit creatively.
I love it. Were there any of the top team that felt awkward about it or were a little bit uncomfortable about this particular approach?
Do you know what? They were a really good bunch, and I had pitched it to them, and I basically said, we're not going to cause any harm. Like, the business is going to be fine. Let's just try it. And they were so up for trying it. Nice. Like, I remember one guy who was a bit like, do you really have to? And I said, just go on. And he was like, okay. So that was really helpful, because not every organisation would go for that. And the employees loved it. And what was really interesting was the new joiners loved it, but who really loved it was actually the people who'd been there for ages, who were like manning the speed dating tables. Okay. I had kind of roped them in as like, I need some volunteers. And then the next time I ran it, I actually had a waiting list of people that wanted to do it. They all wanted to be a part of it. So it was brilliant.
And that's very cool, because you're going to get an amazing energy between the existing employees and the next round coming in, because the people who are participating, who are longstanding employees, bringing a very different energy than previously on these age-old presentations.
Yeah, and it's a bit more interactive, after the
Right.
induction, you feel like you've really met some people. You haven't just had them speak at you, but you've had some real conversations.
And we know how important that is when it comes to distributed workers, wherever they're distributed and to what degree, in terms of feeling that you can actually reach out and you've connected with them about something. And so a speed dating environment would be a very nice way to break down barriers and feel comfortable reaching out to someone if needs be. You then moved from there to join Irish Gardaí. Am I saying that correctly?
It's awful for non-Irish people. I'm so sorry. It's An Garda Síochána. It's the Irish language. It means guardians of the peace.
Ah, okay. So Joanna joined the police force.
That's much easier.
That is easier. And why did you take that job then? Because as far as I remember from our previous conversation, they had been told that they needed this role created. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So in 2018, there was a big independent review of the Irish police force. And this review resulted in a raft of recommendations about things that needed to improve. Loads of things. And one of them was internal communication. That got flagged in this report as something that needed a bit of effort behind it. So the government mandated a load of changes, and one of these changes was you have to hire somebody to run internal communication.
What was the research showing that there was a problem with internal communications and therefore requiring someone?
Yeah, you could see the symptoms of this really displayed in the culture. There was a very big divide between management and frontline officers. There was a real us and them. There was a real difficulty with complex, convoluted language. There was a raft of very long-winded emails in an organisation where people are really short for time. And there was a lot of, nobody told me that, and I didn't know that, and lots of resistance to change as a result. So you could see it and you could feel it, and it was pretty obvious from this report that something had to change.
So a very positive environment for you to be walking into.
Do you know what? If I'm in a job where it's easy and everything is running smoothly, I get incredibly bored.
Okay,
so
all right.
One of the things that appealed to me about this job, because I knew that, the Irish police is around for 100 years and it's 20,000 people, and I knew they'd never had a head of internal communications before. And plus, I'd never been a head of internal communications before. So I just thought, God, I'd love a go at that. And I'm also super obsessed. I'm that person that's always watching true crime documentaries and unsolved mysteries.
Oh yeah, that's true. I do that too, yeah.
So I just thought, and I remember applying for the job thinking there's absolutely no way they'd ever pick me. And I was like, well, they definitely won't pick me if I don't apply. So I applied, and then I got the interview, and I was like, there's no way they'll pick me. And I remember coming out of the interview and thinking, God, I had a great time. They definitely won't pick me because I was way too much me. We were laughing and joking and we had a great time. And then I remember getting the phone call where they offered me the job. I think I was in so much shock. I got off the phone and I told my husband, and then I said, oh, I think I need to ring them back. And he said, why? I said, I think they've made a mistake. I think they've rang the wrong person. And he was like, no, they've offered you the job. And I think I had to sit down then.
Okay, so then what happened? As excited as you might have been about the prospect, about the challenge, what then happened? What were the surprising challenges that you didn't expect? And how did you approach the changes that were necessary, the multiple aspects, because the report had showed there were multiple issues, and many of those will have been your responsibility not to be changing all of them, but when they were being changed, communicating them in a coordinated fashion.
So I spent, I would say, the first 3 months. So I joined in May of 2019, and I'd say the first 3 months, it probably just looked like I was drinking coffee. So I really this is where all my sociology training came in, because I just listened and observed and asked questions
Right.
and took it all in.
Mm-hmm.
Because I hate, I have this bugbear where people come in to an organization they don't know, and there's this awful phrase, quick wins, when people are under pressure to do something quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, but how can you don't understand what the problems are, and you don't understand what's causing those problems. So I spent a lot of time, I went around Ireland and I sat in police stations, I sat in management meetings, I sat in the canteens. I remember sitting in a police station canteen and watching, just kind of sitting there watching as people came in and out. And like, it was such a small thing, but it was so useful to know. There was this huge big notice board on the wall, kind of creaking with pamphlets and leaflets and posters, and not a single person even glanced at it when they came in. And I thought, that's a waste of time. But what they were likely to look at as they sat down and they had their coffee or their tea, if they were on their own, they were picking up anything that was on the table in front of them. So the last newspaper that was left, or those little observations, and then understanding, like, what's it like to be a police officer, and how does information flow around here, and how does it all work? So I spent the first 3 months just trying to understand it. And then I built up a strategy, really understanding that one of the biggest issues we had was reach. It was actually the name of the strategy I developed, because the channels did not reach people who weren't at desks. So we had to kind of fix that. And then, sure, COVID came along and changed everything.
COVID obviously brought a whole bunch of other issues and challenges, and a cohesiveness and sense of togetherness, I imagine, as well. You had your first 3 months, and then how are you trying to change that culture, trying to reach out to people and create more connectivity and information flow prior to crisis conditions, which would change everything?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the trick for anyone in this role is to build really strong relationships across the organization. So that's what I was starting to do, particularly with people that I knew I would need to lean on for success, like key senior leaders, like the head of IT, the head of digital. If I wanted to introduce new digital channels, we were going to have to work together. And I remember actually, one of the things that surprised me about the culture, I just didn't know as an outsider, but there was a bit of us and them between. So there's two types of employees that work in the police here in Ireland. We have the uniformed police officers, that's about, say, 14,000. But then there's a few thousand, what they call Garda staff. I was one of them, a civilian, basically. So I'm not a police officer, never trained as a police officer, but I work in the police force. And there was quite a divide between the Garda staff and the Garda members, the police officers. So I had to try and figure out, here I was coming in totally from as an outsider, as a woman in a very male-dominated organisation, and quite young for the seniority level I came in at. So what I did was, when I developed a strategy document, I actually spent a whole day doing this, but it paid off. I had got it like designed nicely, printed it out. At the time, sending things in the mail was still really common in the police. Like, they were late adopters to digital, I'd say. So I actually wrote a letter to every single senior leader. I think that was about 320 police officers across the organisation. Hand signed them all and put them in the mail as a way of introducing myself. This is what I'm here for. Here's the strategy document that shows I've listened to your people. And they all, when they read the strategy and saw what I was going to do, they all intuitively knew that these were the problems. I'm like, here's someone finally who's going to fix it. So that really helped, because I had people coming to me then saying, will you come and talk to my team? Will you help me with this? So that was really simple but effective.
Right. And now we have a very interesting and extraordinary situation that happened, which still blows me away. So then COVID happens, and the Swiss police, and I'd love you to explain why the Swiss police reached out to the Irish police force with a dance challenge. How did that happen? And then what
So
happened?
your listeners are really going to think that I am making the story up, but I promise this is true.
John had told me this, and I've now looked online. So you can look at Swiss Police and Irish Police Dance Challenge, and the videos are fantastic.
So what happened was, I think it was the pandemic wasn't yet a year on, and we'd had some really brutal lockdowns here in Ireland and right across Europe. People were really anxious and depressed and frightened. It was a really dark time. There was just no joy in our lives. And one day this tweet appeared. It was from the police force in Switzerland, and they tagged the Irish police in it. And they were doing this really weird, like synchronized dance to some music I'd never heard.
Right.
And they tagged us, and they were like, hey, we challenge you to do this dance. And we were like, what? And then we were like, okay, why not? I mean, it was totally the kind of thing that we needed, because it was so ridiculous, and it was just this little bit of happy silliness in the sea of sadness. So we got some police officers. Even telling this is so crazy. We've got some police officers in different parts of the country. They learned this dance, and we had a video guy in house.
You energized this within the police force, right? As internal comms, you must have been one of the people coordinating and saying, hey, let's do this.
So there was a broader comms team, thank goodness. And we all just said, let's do it. There was no question that we wouldn't.
Right.
And it was actually a really nice way to showcase Ireland as well, because if you watch the video, there's police officers dancing on the beach and dancing on top of a police station building and in a field. And we even have some horses from the Irish police training college. They learned the dance somehow. I don't know how.
The horses are actually doing the dance. It's very funny.
And what happened next was so crazy, because we put it up on Twitter and we tagged the Swiss police and we said, here you go, we did your challenge. And it went completely viral. It had millions and millions and millions of views. And I really think we hit a nerve with people, because everyone was so depressed. And this was just so ridiculous. You couldn't help but smile when you were watching it. And people really needed that spark of joy. And then people started sending us in videos of them doing the dance challenge themselves. I remember this one that always stuck with me, because nursing homes were hit so horribly by COVID here. And there was one, like people in a nursing home, spinning around in their wheelchairs and dancing in the garden, and like old people smiling, and it was just so surreal, and I'll remember it for the rest of my life. It is on YouTube. If you Google Irish Police Dance Challenge, you'll see it. I promise I'm not making it up.
It does sound like she's making it up, and it is fantastic. It definitely made me smile a lot, particularly the horses, actually. So also, how did that help shift the culture as well, internally within the police force, but also externally in terms of how they were perceived with the Irish public?
I think there was this dance challenge and a couple of other things that the police did during COVID really changed the public perception. I mean, the Irish police force, like every police force everywhere, has been through a few public scandals, and trust on the part of the public hasn't always been there. But fair play to the Irish police, because from the very start of COVID and very quickly, they demonstrated immense empathy through their actions. So one of the things the Irish police did, for example, was they very quickly said through all their channels, across radio, TV, social media, we're here to help. And that was the message we sent out to the public. So we had police officers in local communities going to the pharmacy, for example, to fill people's prescriptions who maybe were like vulnerable, or they'd be going doing the shopping for an old lady who was isolating. Also, like really nice little touching moments of, there was a child in a community who was very unwell, and it was his birthday, and some police officers got a police car and a fire truck and like did a big drive-by with all the lights blazing and like waving at the kids in the garden, and all social distancing, all fine. But the tremendous empathy, there was a real sense of like, we're in this together and we're here to help you. And I just felt so proud to be a part of that. And there was some external studies actually done, some public surveys, which showed real spikes they were looking at the trust in public institutions, and trust in the Irish police went massively up during COVID because of the work that these police officers were doing.
So generally in your work with the police and since then, what do you see some of the optimal ways that internal communications can be supporting culture, particularly when the police force is a naturally distributed workforce? They're mostly in the field for the 14,000 of them, and the civilians are more of the time in the stations or wherever they're working from. How do you create that connectivity? How do you build the empathy and the trust in other ways without a dance challenge, without some of those touch points that you could have in a pure service organization as you have in the police force, when you have a different type of environment where the relationship between the enterprise and the customers and prospects has a different cadence and different dynamics? How do you really use internal communications in the best way possible?
So the core of a really good internal communications function is to create a shared understanding across all the employees, and to really look at not what is different, but what are the things that are the same? What are the golden threads that cross every single person in the organisation? So I always would go back to the vision and the mission and the values of an organisation, because they link everybody together. During the police, I leaned very heavily. I was very lucky with the mission we had. The mission of the Irish police used to be a beacon of policing in the 21st century, which is a bit of a mouthful. During COVID, the mission of the police was keeping people safe. I mean, you couldn't have asked for something better. So I really leaned that inward. So the purpose of my job was keeping our people safe, keeping police officers safe. And we talked about that a lot.
Okay.
But I think in any organization, if you go back to, like, you know, the vision or the purpose. So why does the organization exist? Why are we here? And then the mission is like, well, what are we doing and how do we do that? And then the values are all around your behaviors, what you do, what you don't do. All of that can be used very strongly to align people. And that's where, I mean, I love that definition of culture where they say culture is how we do things here. Because if you get your core values right and you're actually living them, that defines your culture.
Do you see some of the challenges with companies that are moving to make distributed work more successful? It's not that easy or obvious, and we can see the strains in the system at the moment. How can companies building on that make some changes, make it easier? There are many companies that say, well, our culture isn't set up for remote working, which is why everybody has to be back in the office. What would be some of the advice that you'd give them?
I think that's, it's so strange, isn't it, to watch all these companies say, I hear this a lot, oh, we have to go back for our culture. And I'd always say, well, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. Oh, we have to go back for collaboration. And I'm thinking, is collaboration specific to a location? I didn't know that was true. I think the crux of this is that it's a little bit like the conversation we had last time. I think I used the word unlearning.
Yes.
And
definitely.
There's something that we've learned over decades of working in an office. We have learned that is how work gets done. We go to an office and we work there and then we finish and we go home. And I think a lot of us now, since COVID, like I work fully remote. I will never work in an office really ever again. I have unlearned that office work and I have relearned a new way of working, a new life actually. But for many others, perhaps they don't like learning. Perhaps they're not so curious. It's easier to default to what you've done for 20 years rather than to take the time to intentionally redesign your entire business or redesign entire workflows or to look at other ways of collaboration. It takes a lot of work. And you look at like companies that I think are doing this really well. Atlassian comes to mind, Zapier, GitHub. There's a lot of intentional effort goes into designing that to be successful. And that's the bit that people are kind of missing. It doesn't just happen. You have to design it.
Right. It certainly does. Joanna, what haven't I asked you that I should have done?
You haven't asked me about my newsletter.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So
Joanna, tell us about your newsletter.
I started a newsletter recently, and I was thinking, what am I going to call this thing? People ask me for advice about communication all the time on LinkedIn.
Oh, okay.
And I really just don't have the time to have one-to-one calls with everyone. So I thought, why don't I set up a newsletter? People can sign up if they want. And I thought, actually, the word that comes to mind all the way through my life is curious. That's why I took sociology, probably why I took the job with the police.
Yeah.
So I've called the newsletter The Curious Route, because I think that describes my approach to my work. I always take the curious route to try and understand why are things the way they are. Yeah. So in this newsletter each week, I take some scientific studies or some behavioral psychology. I'll unpack it, and then I'll give you some actionable tips on how you can use that to become a better communicator. So, for example, this morning actually just went out all about the power of rhymes and how you can use rhymes to not only make your communications more memorable, but actually make them persuasive. And I will use an example in that from the O.J. Simpson trial, where the defense attorney said, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit, when he was talking about, the glove that the killer was supposed to have worn. And O.J. Simpson was struggling to put it on. And this became a mantra of the whole trial. And people believed it. And sure, he was acquitted. So tips and communications advice and lots of scientific nerdy stuff, because I love that.
To just end with one more tip that people can be implementing tomorrow.
The best tip I can give you, I'll give you two. One is, whenever you are creating a communication, don't think about yourself. Think about your audience. It's not about you, it's about them. Mm-hmm. And connected to that, I will recommend you a book, actually. The best book I've read this year is called Smart Brevity. And it's all about concise, short, effective writing. And the book argues very successfully that since the creation of the internet, the way that people consume information has changed drastically. Mm-hmm. People don't read stuff anymore. They skim it. They scan it. So you need to write in a way that people can skim it. They can get the gist very, very quickly. Okay. For example, when I ran the newsletter in the police, like an article was 200 words at the most. So my advice is, when you're writing something, get to the point and get there quickly, and then stop. It's the stopping that people have trouble with. Say what you want to say it quickly, and stop.
And on that basis, I certainly won't ask you another question. Joanna, now, very quickly and gratefully, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful conversation. Thank you, Joanna. Thanks so much again to Joanna Parsons, multi-award-winning internal communication expert. You can follow Joanna on LinkedIn, where you can also sign up for her newsletter, The Curious Route. Do also follow the link in the show notes to watch the dance challenge videos. Immediate action tip. First, when creating a communication, think about the audience, not yourself, and connect it to them. Second, when you are writing something, get to the point. Say what you want to say it quickly, and stop. For more about modern business environments, effective new work practices, understanding your employees, and how to nurture a strong culture, try reading or listening to my second book, Empathy Works, The Key to Competitive Advantage in the New Era of Work. If you enjoy this podcast, why not tell a friend as well as like it? And please write a quick review wherever you listen. For regular video updates, curated useful articles, research and information, follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter at @SophieWade. For more information to help navigate this period of transformation, you can also sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter on LinkedIn and my blog, which is available on sophiewade.com and flexilnetwork.com. Until next time.